Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, The Man Crisis. Learn why so many men are struggling to find their way in an increasingly gynocentric world in The Man Crisis. Get your copy of The Man Crisis in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today.
When the narrative does not fit what white supremacists want people to hear, they make an effort to try to change the story. And we saw this a couple of months ago with the murder of George Floyd and the alleged release of body cam footage in an effort to try to implicate George Floyd and make him complicit in his own murder, even though we all saw George Floyd murdered in front of us. And now we have the mainstream media making another effort to try to gaslight the public in the case of Kyle Rittenhouse. Now, your Kyle Rittenhouse was clearly seen on video carrying an AR-15 in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and it was clearly shown of him allegedly murdering two Black Lives Matter protesters and maiming a third. And most of the media outlets at the time, when they originally reported the story, told us that your Kyle Rittenhouse had went out here and bought this AR-15, and we were also told that his mother drove him down from Illinois all the way to Kenosha, Wisconsin. And that was the original story presented in most media outlets, and that story was very condemning of your Kyle Rittenhouse, because that story clearly showed that your Kyle Rittenhouse came there with an intent to do harm. However, the white supremacists did not want that story out there because that story did not reflect white supremacy's narratives as related to the image of white men they wanted out there. So now what they're doing is trying to revise the story and revise the narrative to make it appear to be more appealing to people across the country by trying to make us believe that Kyle Rittenhouse is some sort of victim. However, when you take an objective and critical examination of the details of the news story, they further make your Kyle Rittenhouse look to be more guilty than innocent in any situation. Now, your Kyle Rittenhouse in the news story is supposed to be the son of a single mother, and he is one of 3 children. And according to his mother, who is supposed to be working in the medical services, she was so busy working she didn't know where her son was. And in this news story, your Kyle Rittenhouse manages to go out here and borrow a friend's AR-15, and then goes and has another female accomplice drive him from Illinois all the way to Kenosha, Wisconsin. And in this news story, it doesn't make the family look like they're the bad guys for participating in child abuse and child neglect, but it further convicts your Kyle Rittenhouse, because in this new story, we clearly see that he's one of these textbook beta males, like I talk about in my book, The Man Crisis. And even with both narratives, we clearly see that your Kyle Rittenhouse is one of these beta males who clearly has some sort of fixation with law enforcement, similar to what George Zimmerman had in Florida. And this fixation, and I would say even go on to say obsession with the police, is the thing that motivates him to go down to this riot zone and so-called help the police. Now, the news story that the white supremacists want to try to tell you is, oh, he, in some cases, he was working there or he was volunteering there, but the whole point of these details is the fact that here we have a 17-year-old minor out here with a loaded automatic firearm, and he's entering a riot zone, and there is no way anybody with a rational mind can justify this. This boy had no business being in that zone whatsoever, And just him being there clearly shows there was a problem with his family situation, and that there was clearly a problem with him. And this flies over the heads of many of these people who are a part of these white supremacist groups in their efforts to try to justify Kyle Rittenhouse's actions. They further implicate him, and they further show how detached these people are from reality, because there is no way any rational person can justify Kyle Rittenhouse's actions. He was clearly out here to do harm. I mean, what 17-year-old is going to go out here and have the mind to talk about you're going to go from your area of Illinois all the way to a riot in Kenosha, Wisconsin, unless there's some malice of forethought as related to doing harm, especially when you see this 17-year-old carrying a loaded semi-automatic AR-15 rifle coming to this area. That really, again, shows malice of forethought. But what the white supremacists want to do is gaslight us into believing that your Kyle Rittenhouse is some sort of innocent, but he's clearly guilty. Because once you start to take apart this argument and you start to see how ridiculous and completely illogical it is. Now, if we substitute police officer with EMT, we start to see how ridiculous this argument is. Now, let's say for hypothetical reasons, your Kyle Rittenhouse at 17 years old decides to go down to Kenosha, Wisconsin, and wants to so-called volunteer to help out the EMTs and help them deal with the sick and the wounded. Now, any EMT is not going to allow some civilian to come in here and so-called help out people who are sick and injured, because this individual does not have any sort of training, and the health department would not allow those EMTs to have this individual interfering with their technicians while they're trying to go out here and save lives, because this individual is not somebody who is trained and certified in emergency medical techniques, and this person is not somebody who is authorized to go into a home and participate in emergency medical technician work. And if this person, like a Kyle Rittenhouse, was going out here and dealing with people who had heart attacks or strokes, and he's got no real training, and he goes and performs CPR on somebody and they die, then what happens is the people who are a part of the emergency medical team, they are going to be held liable as related to this person losing their life, because they let a person who was a minor, who had no certification and no training, work on that person's body. And that whole family is also going to be held liable, because when you have a minor participating in emergency medical technician work and they're not qualified to do this, that family is going to be held liable for the death of that individual that they were working on. So most people are not really thinking about that from the logical perspective of this individual who is not qualified to be a police officer, has no training to be a police officer. He's on the street with a loaded firearm. And what's really troubling was all those officers were out there and they didn't make any efforts to arrest this boy, because this was a boy carrying a loaded firearm and he's walking down the street like it's nothing. And he says he's helping the police, but the covert contract many of the white supremacists had with this boy would have put more people in danger, because when he was confronted by those Black Lives Matter protesters, what would have happened hypothetically if one of those bullets went the wrong way and hit an officer? That's something most of these people who are white supremacists aren't really thinking about, because they're in their feelings about your Kyle Rittenhouse, and they're not thinking about the danger that this boy was in and putting other people in by being in that riot. And having that loaded weapon. Now, I'll also go on for another hypothetical situation to show you how illogical this argument is. And let's say your Kyle Rittenhouse wanted, at 17 years old, wanted to enter the adult entertainment industry. Now, let's say those same enablers drove him down to one of these sets. I guarantee you those people in that industry would have sent him home because they know that that industry has a lot of strict regulations, and because that industry has strict regulations, they don't want the interference of the federal government to be able to shut them down. And one of those regulations is any performer has to be 18 years old, and that was shown to us with the Tracy Lords scandal back in the 1980s, where they had to practically confiscate a whole bunch of films and destroy them because Tracy Lords was underage. And the whole thing is that when you have a minor who is grossly not qualified to make any sort of decision, and they decide to go out here, that again shows us that this individual wasn't innocent. And what's sad is we have a whole host of adults who, instead of wanting to hold this boy accountable and hold his family accountable, are trying to make excuses for this boy and his really dysfunctional and borderline behavior. Because when I look at your Kyle Rittenhouse, I see, again, another one of these textbook beta males that I talk about in my book, The Man Crisis, and I see how his pattern of behavior had him fixated on these police, and this fixation with the police, which was bordering on obsession, was the thing that drove him to go out here and go down to a riot and try to, as I see it, try to participate in this delusion he had about trying to stop these crimes. But when you look at this logically, you see it makes no sense, because he's going down to a protest to quote-unquote help police, but he's breaking laws because, one, he has a firearm that he borrowed from somebody else that he should not have obtained, because as a minor you cannot carry any sort of weapon, and two, he then had somebody, according to the news story, drive him down from Illinois all the way to Kenosha, Wisconsin, and that person, he already has gotten them in trouble, because by doing that and going across state lines, he has gone out here and encouraged someone to commit a crime by driving a minor across state lines with a loaded weapon that he is not have any license for. So this whole argument they have about trying to help the police while you're carrying a loaded firearm, this shows you how insane some of these white supremacists are in their efforts to try to justify Kyle Rittenhouse. But what they want to do is create a covert contract between your Kyle Rittenhouse in order to get legal precedent to cover themselves. That's what they're trying to do in the big picture, because what they want to do is establish a legal precedent through Kyle Rittenhouse's now case that's in court, in order so that they can have the justification to go out here and be able to continue committing more crimes. Because if they can get Kyle Rittenhouse acquitted through the criminal courts for the murders of those two Black Lives Matter protesters and the maiming of a third, these white supremacists can then further feel emboldened, because now they have legal precedent that justifies them going out here to break not only state laws of Illinois and Wisconsin, but federal laws as related to interstate traffic and interstate commerce. So this is all about white supremacy trying to find a way to justify being able to go out here and do more harm, and have the justification to go out here and be able to participate in illegal behavior and make our society far more lawless than it was. And what they want to do is use this boy and use his case as a justification for going out here to do more harm. And what they want to do is rewrite his story to make him appear to be more sympathetic than he actually is. And there's nothing you can sympathize about Kyle Rittenhouse because the attempt to make him into a victim only shows us more that he was one of these textbook beta males, and he was a beta male who was fixated on police. And when he saw his delusion being attacked by these Black Lives Matter protesters, this triggered him and led him to start trying to manipulate people in an effort to try to get those people to, one, give him a loaded firearm, and then two, drive him across state lines, and then have him so where he can be in a situation where he could murder the people who were attacking his delusions about the police and make those people pay for shattering his delusions about the police. When you look at your Kyle Rittenhouse, this was a very deeply, deeply disturbed individual. And when I look at him, I see a lot of eerie parallels to your George Zimmerman, because your George Zimmerman had the same type of delusions about becoming a police officer, and because he could not meet his obsession in reality, he wound up going to that Florida complex and wanted to call himself being the police officer over that complex. That was a position he gave himself as the so-called night watch. And when he did that, he saw Trayvon Martin, somebody who did not fit who he thought should be there, and then wanted to use that as a justification for for racially profiling Trayvon Martin and then murdering Trayvon Martin. And that was the case that set the legal precedent that emboldened many of these racist and white supremacists to believe that they were justified in going out here to do harm, not only to black men, but to anybody who disagrees with them. And it also led to the rise of Donald Trump. And again, the American people don't understand the legal precedent that is being set right here by your George Zimmerman, and they don't understand the legal precedent that is being set by your attempts to try to gaslight people on Kyle Rittenhouse. Because the big picture, it's all about setting that legal precedent. But if you set that legal precedent where an individual like Kyle Rittenhouse can feel justified in going out here to clearly commit murder, as I see it, then you're going to start to see the decline of American society. Because when a minor who should never have been in a riot's position is justified in going out here to a place where he should have never been, and people try to excuse his behavior, it shows how far our country has fallen. Because when you have people trying to say, oh, he was the son of a single mother, his mother didn't know where he was, that shows, again, a failure of our family unit and a failure of people to even think about good, decent morals, because the people who enabled this boy, they also need to be charged. The person who gave him the gun and the person who drove him down there. And if it's his parents, they need to be charged with child abuse and child neglect. And this whole case is them trying to deny problems that were going on as related to the complete collapse of the American family. And again, they don't want to talk about the collapse of the American family because that points a finger at the American woman and holds her accountable for the dysfunctional way that these boys are being raised. And your Kyle Rittenhouse is a textbook example of the dysfunctional way boys are raised in these single mother households, because when you have a boy who is so fixated on law enforcement, it shows that this boy is not really having any balance as related to his life, because you need a father to give a boy balance so that he understands that there are boundaries to going out here and supporting any sort of group. Because when you have a father in your life, you understand that, yes, you may want to support the police, but if there is a riot going on, these officers are the ones who are supposed to be in charge. And if you want to support these officers, the best way you can do that is by staying home and letting those trained professionals be able to contain a situation, because those trained professionals, they have to follow a chain of command, and in that chain of command you have to obey your watch commander, who will tell you where you can go, what you can do, and what procedures you can follow for containing a situation. That is how law enforcement is supposed to work. Unfortunately, when you have race soldiers and white supremacists infiltrating law enforcement, they try to make passes for guys like Kyle Rittenhouse, and they try to create covert contracts so that these individuals can go out here and do harm. And these covert contracts are, this person will be able to do harm, and then because they're a minor, they can get away with that. And this is no different than these gangs who go out here and have young 10, 11, and 12, and 13-year-old boys go out here and sell drugs for them, because they know that this young boy will not suffer any penalties, and this boy will just go to juvenile detention and won't go to prison the way an adult would. So this is all about trying to manipulate people, trying to gaslight people, and this is the second attempt that the mainstream media has used to try to gaslight people, because they want to push a certain narrative about your Kyle Rittenhouse the same way they want to push it about George Floyd. And it just shows us how racist our media is, and how it's trying to make it into where the white person is innocent, but the black person is supposedly wrong. And it shows us again how racist our media is, because instead of trying to present the objective facts to us as related to both the cases of Kyle Rittenhouse and George Floyd, they're just going out here trying to push a narrative to polarize people. And this effort to try to polarize people, it's going to put more people at risk, because when you have a 17-year-old boy out here and you're trying to make him into some sort of hero when he wasn't a hero, that's really troubling, because that you're trying to make this boy into something that he's not, when he was clearly in the wrong. And to justify his wrong, it just shows how depraved many in America have become, and how they really don't see how far they have fallen. Because when you have a 17-year-old boy who decides to go into a riot, and you're trying to make him out to be a hero, when the problem was he should have never been there in the first place. And what was really troubling was you had all those cops standing around, and nobody is looking to say, hey, look, why are you here? You need to go home. That's where you start to see how far America has fallen and how broken our country has become, because any good cop who has a good moral compass, he's going to look at a 17-year-old boy holding an AR-15, and the first thing he's going to say is, why are you here? Where is your parents? And once he finds out that this is a 17-year-old boy, and I look at this, I looked at pictures of him, and I could easily tell this was a boy. And I'm going to get, if I see it, and if you have a good cop, he's going to say, look, we got to take you down to the precinct, because you are not only putting us in danger, you're putting yourself in danger. And they're going to quickly call his parents and get him out of there, because they understand in a riot situation, this boy is not only putting him in danger, they're putting other officers in danger, and this is not helping the police, this is hindering the police, and his behavior clearly shows some sort of extreme obsession and extreme dysfunction. But the mainstream media wants to try to gaslight us into making us believe he's innocent, when clearly this boy really needs a mental health intervention of some kind. Because when you have delusions like this and people just continue to enable it, again, it shows how deeply disturbed our country has become on its perceptions of right and wrong. If you want to learn more about the dysfunctional behavior of beta males like Kyle Rittenhouse, you can pick up my book, The Man Crisis, on Amazon.com and other online booksellers. And this book will explain to you why many of these males like Kyle Rittenhouse participate in a spectrum of violent behaviors and why they go out here to think that they're doing these things and they're perfectly justified in doing them. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.